It rolled off the mountains like a living thing, rattling loose shingles on the old cabin and driving spears of snow across the clearing. Pines bent and whispered. The sky, a heavy slate, seemed to press the whole world flat beneath it. Inside, the little place was all orange light and cracked shadows. Fire snapped in the wood stove. A tin kettle breathed steam. On the table, an oil lamp hummed. And the man who owned it all, John Mercer, 62, shoulders like fence posts, hands cut by winter and work, sat mending a leather bridle, listening to the storm think out loud. He'd spent years this way, deep in the Bitterroot backcountry, too far for neighbors, too close for comfort to the old mining roads that went nowhere now. He had a horse, a few cattle, a freezer full of elk meat, and a radio that could pull in baseball games when clouds let him. He had silence, which felt like company most days. And he had legends, stories traded at feed stores and county fairs, about a tall, shadow-born thing that moved with the ridgelines folded. He'd laughed at those stories once. Not anymore. Not after all these winters. Not after the quiet taught him that the world is bigger than what a man can hold in his fists. A thud hit the porch. Not a branch. Not a drift. It was too solid, too wet. Leather bridle, and needles slipped from John's hand. The wind fell off for a breath. As if the whole forest leaned closer, he reached for the rifle out of habit. Not fear, habit. Checked the chamber, listened. Another sound came, low and ragged. An animal's breath dragged over gravel. He thumbed the latch and opened the door a crack. Snow barreled in, stinging his cheeks. The porch lamp swung, throwing a weak cone through the blow. At the edge of the light lay something so large that, for a second, John's brain just refused. A heap of dark fur, a chest heaving, a hand. No, a paw, no, a hand the size of a ham, splayed in the snow, and eyes, amber, human bright, pooling with pain. Lord, John whispered, voice yanked out of him like a splinter. You're real. The creature tried to lift its head. A dull, animal groan vibrated the porch boards. Blood, thick and dark as old motor oil, soaked the fur along its ribs. John's mind spat options. Shut the door, get the lantern, fire a warning shot, run. But the eyes found him again, and in them he saw a plea he knew too well. The kind a calf gives when the river ice takes it. The kind a horse gives when barbed wire finds bone. He lowered the rifle. I ain't leaving you, he said, the old words he'd used on broken things. Not out here. It took everything he had to drag the thing across the threshold. Its weight was all gravity and heat and the metallic stink of blood. The door slammed behind them. Snow eddied in the lamplight, then died. The cabin shrank around an impossible shape on his floor. Up close, it was worse. Not a bear, not even close. The shoulders were too human, the skull too high, the mouth too gentle. Lashes clung to ice. Breath steamed. Fur matted where something had torn it open. A gash along the left side. A puncture near the shoulder. Bruises blooming under hair like storm clouds under ice. Somebody did a number on you, John muttered, already moving. He threw blankets from his bed. Well, the thick old ones that smelled of cedar, over the creature's chest. He slung the kettle off the stove, poured boiling water into a bowl, tossed in salt, grabbed a bottle of cheap whiskey he kept for company that never came. He worked without thinking, the way you do when the house is on fire and there's no one to call. He cut away clotted fur. He cleaned the wound with water that turned pink, then red, then dark. The creature flinched, a rumble in its throat that made everything on the shelves tremble, but it didn't strike. It watched him. The amber in its eyes seemed to lift and fall with the heat of the room. Easy, he said, because he needed to hear as much as it did. It's gonna burn. It means it's working. When the worst of the blood ran clean, he poured whiskey gently along the torn flesh. The creature's hand shot out and seized the table leg. Oak groaned. John steadied himself against the stove, counted to the pain aloud like he'd done for skinned knees and shattered collarbones. 1, 2, 3. Breathe with me, big fella. 4, 5. He tore old shirts into bandages. He wrapped what he could, tight enough to hold but not to crush. He tucked blankets around the creature's sides and stoked the stove until the iron glowed and the cabin felt like summer. He set a pail of water by its head and, after a long debate with the part of him still sober, dipped a tin cup and held it near the creature's mouth. It tried. Its lips moved. Its tongue, dark and heavy, found the water. It swallowed, drank again, drank like an animal does after running for its life. Desperate, cautious, grateful. "There you go," John said and heard his voice crack. "That's it." The wind worried the eaves. Time softened. He sat with his back to the stove, the rifle leaning in the corner, the creature's slow breath filling the room. Every so often its chest hitched and a sound rose that wasn't quite a growl and wasn't quite a moan, a sound as old as winter. John watched the lamplight bump along the rafters, watched the lines of his own hands, watched the legend decide, for reasons he couldn't begin to fathom, not to die on his floor. He thought of the shot. Those wounds were from guns, not claws. He thought of men drunk on fear and bragging rights, chasing pictures for the internet and glory for the barstool. He thought of a leader taking a round to the side, a tribe scattering into trees that had kept their secrets for centuries. He thought, for the first time in a long time, about mercy being a kind of stubbornness, refusing to let the world be mean when you can help it be otherwise. Somewhere near dawn, he must have slept. He woke to a soft, rhythmic sound and realized it was a creature's breathing. Deeper now, steadier. The fire had settled into coals. The storm had crawled off the ridge and into memory. The room was blue with morning. He eased himself up, bones popping. He poured coffee that had cooked too long. He peered down at the creature. Its eyelids fluttered. Its hand flexed the way a dog's does when it dreams. He didn't know if Bigfoot's, if that was the right word, Lord dreamed. But if they did, he hoped this one was dreaming of warm places. "Be right back," he whispered, because courtesy is cheap. He tugged on his coat, set the rifle aside. The decision surprised him even as he made it and stepped to the door. The cold met him like a handshake with an old friend who never quite forgives you. He squinted at the sudden white. Snow lay in drifts thrown by the wind, clean edges shining under a weak coin of sun. The air was so clear it sounded like a note. Then he saw them. At first they were just wrongnesses in the picture, places where the light didn't quite match, gaps in the verticals of trees. Then they were silhouettes. Then they were bodies, tall, broad, still as prayer. 1, 2, 5, 10, 20, Jesus. 20 shapes arranged in an arc at the edge of the clearing, watching the cabin like sentinels carved out of the very mountain. Every piece of prey in John's blood woke up at once. Instinct shouted things his mind refused to translate. He put his hands up without deciding to, palms open, every gesture slow. I ain't your enemy, he said to the morning. I ain't anybody's enemy today. They didn't move. They were different sizes. Some only a head taller than a man, some towering enough that the lowest branches touched their shoulders. Their fur drifted with the air like grass underwater. Their eyes, those eyes, caught the pale sun and held it. No breath steamed. No snow fell across their feet. They were part of the picture, and somehow apart from it too. Behind him, the floor creaked. The creature he'd saved stood in the doorway, one hand braced against the jamb. It was smaller now than last night, because it was standing, which is to say, it was the same, and John could finally understand how large it truly was. Bandages stained with brown and black clung to its side. Its breath made small clouds. It looked from John to the open world, then beyond him to the line of giants. A sound rose from deep in its chest. Not a bellow, not a challenge. A chord, low, layered, as if the forest itself had cleared its throat. It rolled across the clearing and touched the first rank of figures. The big ones answered, not with noise, but with motion, the simplest motion. They bowed, first their heads, then their shoulders, a slow, deliberate arc as old as respect. John felt his knees loosen. He grabbed the porch post because he needed something made of wood to remind him wood was still wood. He looked up at the creature by his door and realized, felt it like a weight across his shoulders, that this was no stray. This was no scout. This was someone. The leader took 2 steps into the light. Snow squeaked. It touched its chest with its right hand, fist over heart, and then it did something John would tell no one. Not because he feared being mocked, but because he wanted to keep one thing that was just his. It smiled. Not a human smile. Not teeth. A softening around the eyes. A release of the brow. A recognition. It crossed the distance between them. Slow, careful never to loom, and place its hand, massive, warm through the cold, on John's shoulder. The pressure was gentle. The message, clear as sunlight. I remember. The tribe relaxed as if a rope had been cut. Shoulders rolled. Some turned to look back the way they'd come. One, smaller, wide across the chest, stepped forward and made a small chuffing sound. Eyes shining wet. A child, John realized. Or the closest thing to a child this people had. The leader murmured, a language of breath and timber, and the youngster's head dipped, shy and relieved. John's breath came back to him in pieces. He nodded without meaning to, the way you nod when your horse corrects your bad decisions and you pretend it was your idea. You're welcome, he said, because what else could you say to a myth? You're welcome. The leader turned, casting one last long look through the open door toward the warmth that had kept it alive. For a heartbeat it seemed to weigh something. Then it tugged an amulet. No, a length of twisted vine from around its own wrist. Tucked into the weave were river stones rubbed slick by fingers, a feather the color of ash, a tooth worn blunt. Carefully, it looped the thing over the porch hook where John hung his hat when he didn't remember to hang his hat anywhere. It patted the hook twice with 2 fingers and stepped back. A gift. John swayed. His chest hurt in a way that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with belonging. The leader moved to the edge of the porch, lifted its face, and sang. There was no other word for it. The sound filled the clearing with the weight of rivers under ice. The tribe answered, not with music, exactly, but with breath that braided. For 10 long seconds the whole winter world felt like one living throat. Then, as if following a cue John could not hear, they turned. Bodies slided sideways. They bled into the trees without hurry, without sound. 100 years of hunting had taught them to leave no trail a man could follow, and no picture a camera could make sense of. Snow drifted. Branches lifted. In less than a minute, the clearing belonged to the wind again. The leader hesitated at the last shadow. It looked back one final time at the man on the porch. It raised its hand in a gesture older than nations. Palm out, fingers relaxed. John mirrored it, his own palm showing the cracks and stains of a long life. Go on, he said softly. I'll keep the fire. And then it was gone. Silence folded in on itself, the way quiet does after a church door shuts. John stood with his hand still raised until his shoulder ached. At last he let it drop. He reached for the length of woven vine and touched the stones with thumb. Warmth clung to them, or maybe he only thought it did. Inside, the cabin smelled like whiskey and wet wool. On the floor, the depression where a giant had lain was already rising back to plank. John set water to boil, cleaned his tools, stripped off the ruined bandages he hadn't used. He moved slow, as if any sudden motion might scrub the morning away. Later, with the snow hushed and the sun a shy thing above the timberline, he saddled the horse and rode the perimeter of his land. He found tracks, a turmoil of them, where the tribe had waited, bare feet as big as frying pans. He crouched and put his own hand inside one print. It didn't reach the edges by an inch. He smiled despite himself, a little sideways, like he was getting away with something. At the creek crossing, he found blood that wasn't the leader's, old black drips where something had staggered and steadied again. He found brass casings sunk into slush, thumbed them clean. .30-06. He could name the men in town who shot that round. He rode home without hurry, and he didn't stop at the bar on Saturday, and he didn't mention anything at the feed store. He listened. When men talked about monsters, he went to find more coffee. When they talked about tracks and lights and screams at midnight, he talked about the weather and calves and hay prices until they forgot why they were excited. Nights came and went. He slept deeper. He found himself stepping onto the porch at dawn, coffee steaming, and scanning the tree not with hunter's hunger but with a parishioner's hope. He stopped listening for proof and started listening for presence. Once, He caught the smell of wet cedar when there had been no rain. Once, he found 3 smooth stones stacked on the porch rail in a perfect little tower, and when he knocked them over by accident with his sleeve, they were rebuilt by morning. The top one turned just so, like a wink. Spring unclenched the road. The creek laughed in its bed. Elk came down to meadow in a long, careful line, and a cow licked a calf dry under a sun that felt like forgiveness. In the middle of a wet April afternoon, a pickup growled up John's drive, and a man in a government jacket stepped out, pale and polite. "Mr. Mercer, right?" the man said, flashing a badge so quick it was more memory than object. "We've had reports of unusual activity up this way. You ever hear anything strange?" John sipped his coffee. He looked over the agent's shoulder at the pines, at the folds of shadow where the mountain keeps its secrets. He shrugged, easy as old flannel. "Strangest thing I heard this winter," he said, "was the Coyotes beat the Bruins in overtime on a Tuesday. That's about the weirdest thing I ever heard." The agent smiled like a man who had already decided what he would write in his report. "If you see anything, you be sure to give us a call." "I always do," John lied, and watched the truck shrink down the road like a bad idea you outlived. That night, he set the woven gift beside the lamp. He traced the feather spine. He thought about the way the leader had placed his hand on his shoulder. He thought about how many times in his life he'd been the one on the porch in the snow, pretending he wasn't hurt. He sat a long time without moving, and the cabin didn't feel small or lonely. It felt held. He never told anyone. Not the men with maps. Not the boys with cameras. Not the woman he'd once almost married who sent a Christmas card every 3rd year and wrote her phone number smaller each time. He didn't need to. Some things reveal their truth by how well you keep them. But sometimes, maybe once a month, maybe only when the moon leaned thin and coyotes argued with their own echoes, he'd hear it, a low chord that the trees seemed built to carry. He'd step outside with his coffee and answer the only way that made sense. He'd lift his hand, palm open, and nod toward the forest that had given him back a piece of himself he didn't know he'd lost. And the wind would settle a little, and the world, big and old and full of stories, would feel smaller in a good way, like a room with friends in it. If you ask him now, if you catch him in town, maybe, when the feed store's quiet and his horse trailer needs a tire and the coffee's not burnt. What he believes, he'll tell you this. Some legends got bones in them, some got blood. Some will bleed on your floor if you let him, and if you do right by them, they'll do right by you. That's not magic, that's neighborly. He'll say it without a smile, because he's not trying to sell you anything. Then he'll tip his hat, and he'll go by salt blocks and baling twine, and he'll drive back up into the hills where a porch hook holds a woven bracelet that still smells faintly. If you lean close and close your eyes, of cedar and river stone and winter. And when the night comes, and it always does, he'll set another log on the fire, and the cabin will glow, and in the silence between heartbeats you might swear you hear the forest breathe. Some legends aren't stories you tell. They're promises you keep.